Hi everyone, welcome to today's event, Financial SWOT, Strengthening Your Business for Long-Term Success. My name is Kelly Brown from Business Tasmania. I'm really pleased to be here today with Stacey Joseph from the Tasmanian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and we have a special guest, Danielle Slade from Rural Business Tasmania. This is the fifth event in the 5-part series of the Cost of Doing Business series, which we've been really pleased to be delivering in partnership with the Tasmanian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. So the event today is being recorded and you can access this session on Business Tasmania's YouTube channel and also look back at the last 4 events that you can learn on different topics to help you and your business grow. So I'd like to firstly start by acknowledging the Tasmanian Aboriginal people, the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting, and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. Before I hand over to Stacey and Danielle, I'd like to just quickly talk to you about Business Tasmania and some of the support you can offer. And while I do that, I'm going to share our contact details on the screen. So I'll just check whether you can see that on my screen, the contact details. Perfect. Yep, great. So the Business Tasmania service is a statewide service that anyone across Tasmania who's thinking about starting a business or running a business can actually access a whole range of support. So we're there for you every step of the way, whether you're dreaming of starting a business, been in business for 1 day, 10 days, 10 years, you can actually come to us for anything at all business related, and it's all no cost and it's confidential. What the Business Tasmania team will do is work out what your needs are and how we can actually assist you with the very best solution possible. There are many, many ways in which we help businesses who come our way every day, including accessing events face-to-face and online like this one today. But you can also access our Tasmanian Business Advice Service. So you'll hear a lot today from Danielle and Stacey, and you might be thinking, well, where can I go for assistance after the event to follow through on some of the great things they're talking to you about? And so you can actually contact the Business Tasmania service and we can connect you with free advice. So if you're thinking about starting a business or your Australian business number is less than 12 months old, you can access 2 hours of free advice through the new business support pilot program. Then once your Australian business number is 12 months old, you can access 5 hours of free advice each financial year. So that's a fantastic service. Danielle's one of our fabulous business advisors. So you can actually come to us and we can arrange for you to see an advisor around any topic. It could be something you learned today, or it could be you've got a new idea, might have a challenge, anything at all in relation to running your business. You can access that free advice service for. So that's just one example, but keep Business Tasmania in mind because we exist to help you with a whole range of support. I guess we're the front door, I suppose you could say, to access government support in Tasmania. So just a quick introduction. At that point, what I'd like to do is hand over to Stacey and Danielle and for our event today.
Thanks so much, Kelly. Pleasure to be here again today for the 5th in this fabulous series. So today we're going to be diving into something that often gets pushed to the bottom of the to-do list, which is understanding your financial position. We'll be exploring how to use a financial SWOT analysis to get a clearer picture of where your business is strong, where there's room for improvement, and what risks or opportunities might be on the horizon. Joining us is Danielle Slade from Rural Business Tasmania. She's a highly experienced Tasmanian business advisor with a strong background in small business operations, finance and primary industries, and also a Tasmanian Business Advice Service advisor. Danielle's worked closely with businesses across Tasmania, helping them better understand their numbers and plan for the long term. And it's great to have her insight as part of this session today. So thank you, Danielle.
My pleasure.
Right, shall we get into it?
Absolutely.
Question 1 for you. Can you tell us a little bit about what a financial SWOT analysis is and why it's important for business success?
So I always like to start with explaining what an acronym is. So SWOT just stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. So a financial SWOT analysis is a structured tool that helps business owners assess their internal financial strengths and weaknesses, as well as the external opportunities and threats that can impact their profitability, their resilience, and any sort of long-term sustainability. So the way that the business advisors approach this is basically demonstrating to small business owners that by identifying these factors, you can stop operating on autopilot and instead be making more deliberate, informed choices about pricing, debt, cash flow, investment, and just general business growth. So unlike a general SWOT, a financial SWOT focuses specifically on money-related issues such as liquidity, funding options, pricing strategy, or exposure to market shocks. So it can support everything from budgeting to decisions to whether a business should take on a loan, change suppliers, or just adjust their revenue model in some way.
All very critical business decisions. Could you tell us a little bit about the difference between internal strengths and weaknesses versus those external opportunities and threats?
So obviously the internal factors are the ones that are within your control. So your pricing model, your debt, your cash flow, how you set up your financial systems, whereas the external factors come from outside. So market changes, interest rates, or supply chain disruption. So I don't think many small businesses ever perceive that something like COVID-19 would happen, but this is where we try and factor in what those potential external issues could be. So I like to give examples as I do these sessions. So for example, I had a local lady who was making handmade lavender products. And she basically, when we did a little bit of drilling down into her numbers, what we identified is that she had really high packaging costs. But she was also seeing additional foot traffic because a nearby eco retreat had opened up. And so they were her kind of customers. So what we looked at is switching to bulk recycled packaging. So we're looking at appealing to those customers and we're mitigating her costs, reducing those costs. But then also she started strategically putting things in like tourist gift packs. So it's a little bit about getting that information and that data, what's happening internally and externally, and just adjusting how we do business to try and maximise our revenue and to minimise our costs.
Awesome. Great explanation, thank you. I know SWOTs can get a little bit, just the acronym itself is a little bit intimidating for some people. So having that those examples is really helpful. All right. So our next question is: what are the biggest financial challenges that Tasmanian businesses face?
Okay, so these ones are pretty common for most of the people that I've dealt with. So many small business owners are just so busy doing the work, so they're actually dealing with the things that are happening today, so that they kind of delay or avoid dealing with the finances. It's kind of something where we feel like we have to actually prepare for it, and oftentimes we've got to get information. So it's sort of one of those things that keeps slipping to the bottom of the to-do list. It creates vulnerability, especially when there's unforeseen costs or revenue dips occur and they're a bit of a surprise. Sometimes people can actually be traveling where they're feeling like they're actually profitable, but when we actually drill right down, in actual fact, they're not. So part of it is about by not engaging in these kinds of things, we're neglecting long-term financial planning. So we're not looking to the future. We've got seasonal dips and things like that, or even strategic things on how we're going to grow our business. Big one that happens for most people in small business is dealing with poor cash flow and those delayed payments. So getting that system set up so that you're having the money when you need it and trying to set up your business so that you can manage that cash flow so that you can afford to pay your things on time as well. As I said before, underestimating costs or overestimating revenue, it's a really big thing that happens for a lot of small businesses, again, because it's something we kind of leave as the last to-do list item. And so sometimes things are a bit of a surprise. And then the last one that often we lose track of is inadequate debt management. So not preparing for those situations where we might need to access some form of financing leaves us only poor choices for finance that are usually very expensive and usually come at a time when cash flow is at its tightest.
Yeah. That was such a good overview, and it really links back to some of those previous workshops as well, like some of the things you talked about. There's a real opportunity to go back to some of the other recordings and have a look at, in-source, outsource, and, maximising our cash flow and some of those. And I think all of us are guilty at times of creating our own narrative. Like my gut tells me that the business is doing fine, so everything's fine. And we just obviously, I don't know if anybody else follows this, but 3.5% wage increase coming through as of the 1st of July. So, planning for those things when we're budgeting. And we also have another increase to the superannuation guarantee. So, undertaking these can really identify some of those things that are coming down the line at you, and being prepared in terms of our pricing and those sorts of things to factor in those extra costs.
Absolutely. And as you said, with those previous sessions that we've done, what's good is if you move through these sessions and kind of do those pieces, so looking at break-even points and understanding your marketing strategy, if you're doing these pieces, they kind of dovetail in beautifully to the SWOT. So sometimes just by doing those things as part of how you manage your business, it's going to make things like the future planning, the projection, all of those things where we're trying to actually think of our business three-dimensionally, and not only focusing on today and what needs to be done today, but what's coming up and where can we try and find some opportunities to grow our business in a different way.
Yeah, nice. Excellent. So moving on to question 3, what are some common financial strengths that businesses should be leveraging?
Absolutely. So recognizing and learning leaning into your financial strengths helps you build long-term security, reduces stress significantly, and supports smarter decision making. And that's probably the thing that I think is most important. You can't make good decisions without good information. So having the data means that you can actually be a bit more structured about what you choose to do. So an example that I would give of that is I've had a client who was doing carpentry, and what we found is that he had really high margins converting other buildings into home offices. So during the COVID times, he kind of pivoted his business so that he was basically focusing on that high revenue niche market. So it's a little bit about if a lot of these things are quite common. So when a business owner understands what's working financially, they can reinvest with confidence and focus their efforts where they'll get the greatest impact. So some of the things to think about are things like predictable cash flow. So what that could look like is if you've got loyal customers, maybe talking to them about changing how you do their payments. Perhaps they may be willing to engage you on, for example, a monthly retainer rather than an hourly rate. Because something like those things where people are paying things somewhat in advance, it gives you really good predictable cash flow so that you can kind of say, look, I've got this level of cash flow that's stable, that's going to keep everything functioning. And then I can take my mind off those things so I can focus on the growing my business or finding other ways to make money. Another one is what we call high margin products. So that was the example before, like the higher rates when we're converting, unused shed into a home office. So it's really about looking at where our actual bigger margins is. If we, as we talked about in one of the other series presentations, having something like a flat cost where we're adding a set percentage across the board, we're missing out on the opportunity to actually price appropriately so that we're maximising on those high yield or high volume sales that we do to get that higher level of revenue. Another one would be loyalty or prepaid customers. So again, that sort of idea where you've got customers who regularly or pay up front provide a cash flow buffer and reduce the cost of that customer acquisition. And then the last one that's really important is about well-managed stock and low overheads. So again, we've talked about this previously in one of the other sessions. So when we have to think about stock, we need to be mindful that that stock that you carry from one year to the next, it wasn't free. So therefore, you've got these carrying costs where you've got capital invested in your stock. If you've done your SWOT and you're really clear on your numbers, then what you can do is look at things like, let's discount and move along those things that are underperforming and focus on a bigger range of those things that we have a higher percentage on or that have a higher or quicker sell through.
Yeah. There's so many good points in there, and it brings me back to my hospitality days of the Boston product matrix and actually understanding what you're selling and what you want to be selling, but also coming back to one of the sessions that we did together around having that good information. So that's the strength in itself, is that I have current up-to-date information on where I'm spending money, where I'm getting money from is a strength in itself for a business, as opposed to that, oh, well, people are still paying for things and we're still selling stuff, so we must be all right. Great practical
And to sort of
examples.
rehash the example I used previously, just when I said to, my friend has a fish and chip shop, and I said to her in passing, which item do you get your biggest return on? And at the time she didn't know. And now they find it is absolutely market dependent. So that is a metric that she's always aware of. Every day she knows which particular fish they have on sale gives her the, up to 80% per portion higher profit, because if people don't have a choice about what they want, that's the one that she's going to recommend, because she knows all of her product is good. But why not, if we can get 20 extra sales, there's the extra for today.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's the old, would you like some fries with that? Or I know we used to have to upsell a garlic bread or a dessert because they were our high margin, items. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Beautiful.
So that kind of beautifully leads through again, and I can't say this one more strongly, knowing your break-even points, your profit margins, your KPIs, this is absolutely key. So once we know where you break even, it really helps you know where to set your pricing. And it also makes it so that you can make that decision. If you've got a really loyal customer, you can provide them a tailored or a specific rate or deal, just so that you can prioritise them as a customer. Your KPIs guide you where to invest time and money. And without them, it's really easy to focus on either the fun or popular things, but they're not necessarily profitable. So we need to be focused quite closely on where the money's made. So I had a local craft brewer who, once we drilled down into his numbers, as much as the craft brews with, the seasonal things that he was coming up with were a lot of fun, what he found is that he was making best margins were on a simple lager that sold in bulk. So he immediately then opted to reduce his range of those limited runs and focus on his top selling core beer, which had that knock-on effect of being making it so that he could negotiate a better wholesale deal with, his suppliers as well, because he's buying in volume. So it's really, you can argue or you can negotiate from a position of power if your financials are nice and clear.
Definitely. And I was just going to, with those financial KPIs or key performance indicators, that's something that a Tasmanian Business Advice Service advisor can help a business identify.
Absolutely. And it really is one of the core things that we do offer for people. Yeah. And the nice thing is that it's done, we do it as teammates. So I might be the person who clicks the buttons and types some things into Excel, but we kind of figure these numbers out together. And what I find is for most small business owners, it's all in here. It's just not ordered. And so someone like me can come along and get you nice and organised and nice and ordered. I've got a young woman who has reset up all of her financial strategies. And so one of her to-do list items is every month she looks at her forecasts for the 3-month projection, and then actually will match back each month, because it's kind of motivating for her. It's making her feel like things are moving forward, and that she's getting, she's got a really strong understanding of her market and her customers. And that falls into all the areas: how I market, where I look to find new customers, all of my pricing strategies, all of that comes from the same place.
Yeah, that's so good, because I think that's one of the challenges if you haven't had key performance indicators in terms of your financial performance. Yes, we want to make a profit, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff that sits around that. And there's somebody there to help, and it's at no cost. Thank you to the Tasmanian government. It's a pretty cool thing to be able to come to this workshop, go, I need to do that. I don't know how to do it. Oh, there's somebody here that can help. So pretty good.
And it comes both ways. It's not just about revenue and pricing. It's also about expenses as well. Most businesses operate on that. The final 10% is their profit margin. If you save $1 from an expense, all of that is profit. So it's really about getting on top of those numbers so that you can actually be really strategic about where you can save money without damaging your image, your reputation, or your product.
Yeah, great tip. So I guess the next question is really about how can businesses go about identifying some of those financial opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely. So most financial opportunities often involve increasing your efficiency. So how can we do things more efficiently? Potentially diversifying income. So how can we have an add-on or some way where we've got, tiered pricing or additional services, or making use of an underutilized asset. So really, you need to have a really clear financial data and some curiosity about what's working and really being willing to challenge those things that are not. Because even if you've enjoyed things a certain way, the numbers, there's no point doing business if you're not making money. That has to be your bottom line. And so therefore, if we can be really strategic and save money here and increase our revenue over here, by definition, things should be improving. And more often than not, opportunities aren't always about doing more. Sometimes it's just about doing things differently or smarter.
Yeah, definitely. And you sort of talked about that already, like that sort of stock turnover optimization. So, making sure it's almost that just-in-time approach. But I think you've also given some great examples about, potentially buying things in bulk if you can forecast and know that you're going to use them and sell them. So, that's sort of the way we manage our stock is a good opportunity there often too, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yep. And that also kind of leads into that revenue diversification that I just mentioned. So sometimes it's about maybe that related income stream, so a workshop, a membership, an add-on service. It builds resilience into your business. And sometimes these are the things that balance out those seasonal dips, which we see in Tassie all the time, or attract new customers. So I have a great example for this one. I helped her actually through the NBS program, so the New Business Support Pilot program, had a lovely young woman who, her and a partner had a very, very, very small goat farm, about 35 goats, and she was starting to make goat soap. And so when we strategized, her revenue diversification, she's actually ended up showing at AgFest. So she had a stall at AgFest. And as part of her goat soap, she actually took along about 10 baby goats. And it was $5 to cuddle a goat, and she got more money from the goats than she got from the soap, but she got her name out. So sometimes it's about being, it's a very left of field. We had to do a bit of work to make sure the goats were safe and happy and everything was going to work out well. But for her, this will be something that she will embed. Like the next thing she plans to do is looking at things like on-farm workshops for goat cheese making, and potentially that very, very cute, meet the animals and have a sort of an animal experience. So this is someone who arrived saying, I'm just here to make, I've got all this goat milk, I want to try and make it into soap. We found a way to give her that consistent revenue and another line item that's something I suspect will grow probably quicker, if not bigger, than her actual offering that was her initial plan.
Oh, that is such a good example. She needs to find a yoga instructor because apparently goat yoga is a thing as well.
Absolutely. And I said exactly the same thing. And honestly, she got $5 out of me too. Like the goats were adorable. They really were fantastic. It was. I did buy some soap as well because I felt not obligated. Her products were lovely, but it was just wonderful to see this kind of what started as a giggly conversation between the two of us, turned into something that's probably going to be part of her core business. Like I suspect that she'll be doing farm stay with. Would you like a goat in your room?
Yeah, well, it's kind of great utilisation of an underutilised resource. If you've got them there and you're going to be making soap from their milk, then why wouldn't we be cashing on the fact that they're pretty cute and everybody wants to go and play with a goat? So
yeah, absolutely. And they're more likely to curl up in your bag if you're not careful. So how adorable.
Yeah, a great argument for not shooting down what can initially seem like a silly idea, like just stop and think about it and go, hang on a minute, there's actually something in that. So,
and it really just started with goats bleating in the background. I was like, oh, are you outside? She goes, oh, no, I've got one of my baby goats is particularly little, so we're just fattening him up inside for a little bit where it's warm and stuff for a few weeks so he can get up to. And I was like, that just sounds so adorable.
Yeah, amazing. And I'm sure many businesses have started from, somebody having a harebrained idea, so to speak, but actually converting it into something commercial.
Yeah. So the other better opportunity that I love to hammer home, and I've done it pretty much in every one of these presentations that I've done, is if you don't ask, you don't get. And one of the easiest ways to improve your financials is looking at your suppliers and seeking better terms. And it doesn't mean a cheaper rate or a volume discount or any kind of exclusive sort of deal. It can just be as simple as additional payment terms. So especially if you've got a turnaround, which is a little bit longer, if your suppliers will give you, for example, a 60-day payment window, that means you've got 60 days to take those goods and turn them into something and make them into some sales. So you've actually got some cash flow back before you're needing to actually pay for those stocks. So it's a really good way to be able to keep that cash flow moving. And really it comes down to the relationship that you have with your suppliers.
Yeah, and we did have a really good chat about that, I think, in the in one of the sessions around, shopping around. And I know personally, even with insurance and those sorts of things, it only takes a bit of a Google research to do a bit of comparison, and sometimes you can save yourself pretty hefty amounts of money. It's just a matter of
Absolutely.
finding the time.
And even with that example, it could mean that too, you could then become a bit of a volume customer for that person, where if they're giving you 60 days, you could buy 60 days worth of product and get your production costs lower because you can produce greater amounts for a smaller amount. And, then you've got, you may have a cyclical sales cycle. So I focus the first 2 weeks of the 60 days is about focusing on production, and then the balance is focusing on selling, and we just keep doing that in a cycle, managing your cash flow.
Yeah, nice. Thank you. So our last question for this session, and I'll just change the slide. What financial threats should businesses be prepared for?
Well, I think COVID taught us you need to be prepared for everything. You probably can't be, but you sort of need to try. We need to realise that we just don't operate in a bubble. These businesses, they're impacted like things like economic shifts. We've all seen the cost of living and how people are changing their spending habits. We've got cost increases. So I think, when you start drilling down, things have doubled and trebled in prices for small business to get their materials in. And it could just be things like natural disasters or, rate changes, interest rates, etc. And it could just be how people are generally feeling. Sometimes you get a consciousness that basically says I'm in a spending mood, and sometimes I'm not. Or even just season. It's coming into winter, and we tend to get home, and if it's dark by 6 o'clock, we're probably unlikely to go out again. So the best defense is about proactive planning and financial flexibility. So things like having reserves, so setting aside a portion of the summer increase, if that's what your business does, to try and tide you over that winter time. Having contingencies, like rather than high expensive personal loans or buy now, pay later type loans, looking at things like an overdraft that you can manage really, really tightly. So when the economy tightens, we know that customers cut back. If you're too reliant on one segment or you lack pricing flexibility, your income can just crash. And you need to be in a position where you've got good information and data so that you can try and pivot your business and do better. So, for example, I had a lady who was offering spa and beauty treatments in the south. And what she found is, predominantly her business had all been premium clients that were doing multiple services and being quite regular. As she saw the bookings kind of ebbing off, what she came up with was to look at kind of a suite of more affordable packages that were focusing on that express stress release kind of customer. So she was sort of able to offer something for her current customers that was a bit cheaper, but also attract new customers. The other thing that we talked about was she had the space. So why not look at finding other people who could come in and rent a chair or rent a space in her own business, because a busy salon or a busy spa is going to be probably more attractive to customers than not. And it would mean that she could have that ongoing rent. So that kind of preparing that situation where you've got some cash flow that you can count on, and someone to share those costs like utilities, rent, etc.
Yeah. Such great examples, and I certainly know nobody really, I think, predicted the COVID situation, but there are a lot of things that we can predict, and we've had up until the last few years pretty good times when it comes to business, I think, and I certainly, when we were dealing with a lot of businesses on the helpline over COVID, it was quite concerning how many of these businesses had been having amazing performance, but there was nothing in the bank. And so if you follow, a Scott Pape or somebody like that, then it's like you should always have 3 months worth of in reserve, and those sorts of things. So being prepared for things to not necessarily, always be gangbusters and ready to pivot. How many restaurants did we see go from, fine dining to takeaway and those sorts of things over COVID. So yes, it is really about thinking about some of those worst case scenario things. And if you're old enough to remember, I think the Qantas airline strike was the example we used to use in Tasmania before COVID. And for those of you that aren't old enough, that was when we weren't having any planes in or out of Tasmania, so it was quite a challenging time for businesses that were relying on freight coming in by air. And so, just that concept of if all of a sudden my freight costs were to go up by, X amount, what would I do kind of thing. And Yeah, having a plan
And,
in place.
as I've mentioned before today, like it can be just as simple as, setting aside a percentage of your summer sales so that you've got a little bit of a reserve fund. And that requires a bit of projection. Like we need to actually look at some sort of contingency planning, some sort of idea where we're doing forecasting so that we can kind of do our very best to identify things that could become an issue in the future. And with your example, Stacey, around those small businesses, the fine dining, the thing is that the ones that were most successful during COVID were the ones that were able to pivot quickly. They were able to move over to Uber Eats quickly. And I suspect that was because they knew their numbers. They could see a straight correlation between the drop in sales and basically saying, well, we're going to even change the type of food that we are producing because we need to keep the sales coming through.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess that's, I'm just thinking about the emergency preparedness kit that you can get from Business Tasmania, having good insurance policies and actually having a plan for a flood or a bushfire or, I don't know, some other form of natural disaster, just because we haven't experienced that. Well, in the south we haven't, but if you haven't experienced that doesn't mean that you're not going to. So having that plan that if something, a major disaster occurred, that you actually have good insurances in place. I know you can get insurance to cover the wages of your staff if the building burns down. God, I hope it doesn't happen to anybody, but so being well covered in insurance and using that emergency toolkit for making sure you can tick all those boxes so that if the worst does happen, which is very much an out of our control kind of situation, at least you've got a bit of a plan so you're not kind of left floundering.
And I would embed that as one of those things that whatever your lull is, whether it's summer or winter, whenever your lull period is, going back through and checking all of those things is really key and important to make sure that you are appropriately insured. You could be covered, but you may be missing some key issues, and just making sure that you in that process, you can then make sure that you're actually getting a good quality product for what you're paying for. So by reviewing your insurances and you're making sure that you're appropriately insured, you can then take those that data to another insurance provider to see if they can do you a better rate.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there'd be a lot of businesses out there that are either underinsured or overinsured. So yeah, it's a good opportunity just to do a bit of a check-in with that. And again, it's a service that you can access through the business advisors, through the business Tasmanian Business Advice Service. Sorry, I had a complete mental blank there. But yes, so if you're not sure what you need, sometimes it feels like you're being sold all of this stuff and you're like, do I actually need all of this? We certainly want to make sure we get some good independent advice as to what we do and don't need, and what the downside of not having certain policies are versus, the cost benefit, I suppose, of those things. Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Danielle. You're a wealth of knowledge as always.